Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our meetup. Coincidentally, number 101. So a nice milestone as we go past number 100. As usual, we just want to do a quick thanks to our sponsors. Those are our recurring sponsors, NML, who've been sponsoring us since we started in 2012. So a long time and a long relationship with them. And then IO Digital, who joined us a couple of years ago, and we've had great support there from Liesel Bester, who runs all their operations there. So many thanks to them. They allow us to, pay the bills and do these live streams and things like that. So thanks very much, as always, to our two recurring sponsors. We've got two upcoming events next week. Skulk, who you all know, will be doing an introduction to web components. That is, as usual, up on our meetup. Sorry, let me turn my do not disturb on. Apologies. Skulk will be talking about web components. That's on our meetup group as usual, and you can sign up and join there. And then in April, dates to be confirmed, we are organizing a weekend hackathon for a local community radio station called The Other Radio. They are based in Cape Town, and they have a website that needs some love and care. So if anyone is interested in that, we're going to be putting out a call for interested parties on the ZA Tech Slack channel. And if you're keen to spend some time helping out a really great community initiative, that would be wonderful. All right, I'm going to hand over to Martin, who's going to introduce us to Kent, and then Kent will take over from that. He'll be giving us a presentation, a demo, and then we'll have some time at the end for questions. Please post any questions you might have in our in the YouTube chat, and we see them immediately here, and we will put them on the screen so that we can have a discussion at the end. Okay, thanks. Martin, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Justin. Hi, everyone. Martin here from the Feds and Mentoring Sessions. You can see I've actually got a friend with me here today. This is Cody. He's a very supportive, there he is as well. He's a very supportive figure over at the Kenzie Dodds courses and the Discord there. Speaking of which, I highly recommend checking out the Epic React Dev course by Kenzie Dodds. It's amazing. Seriously, it's the greatest course I've ever come across. And I recommend it to everybody. And it's also got the pricing parity for South Africa. So we get that discount there. Seriously, best course ever. And I'm not sponsored to say that. It really is just that great. But that's not actually why we're here today, as you know. We actually have for the man himself, Kent, who's going to introduce us to Remix Run and show us all the cool things it can do. Ladies and gentlemen, Kent, please go ahead.
Wow, Martin, that was so nice. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm really glad that it's been so helpful. And I'm also very jealous of your koala that you've got in your video. That's awesome. Okay, so yeah, my name is Kent C. Dodds. I created epicreact.dev, testingjavascript.com. I was a full-time educator for 3 years up until I joined Remix in November. And I want to tell you a little bit about why I decided that it would be worthwhile to stop the education stuff and start teaching Remix. So here I'll share my screen. Yeah, I tell you a little bit of the story of why I decided, as awesome as it was, to be able to do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, because I was my own boss. Joining up with Remix ended up being a better thing for me, and I think it'll be a better thing for all of us. What we're going to do here is I've got a little presentation to kind of talk about how we got here, why Remix is so cool for me. And then I'll do a demo, and then we can answer questions. So feel free to submit all the questions that you have as we go, and then we can go through as many of those as we have time for. So yeah, why is Remix so special to me? About a year and a half ago, actually a year ago, this is what my website looked like. This was built with Gatsby. I felt really happy with it. I thought it looked really nice and clean. It had 181 blog posts on it. I had my workshops listed. I had 3 seasons of my podcast on here, listed all of the courses that I've got, and then various other pages that I had for my site. So I had hundreds of pages for this site, and it helped a lot of people. But I decided, hey, I want to redesign this and basically rebuild it completely. And so as part of that process, I was kind of thinking about some of the problems that I'd been having with Gatsby, and more particularly with static site generation. And I'll be brief because I want to move through this pretty quickly. But one of the big problems that I had was build times. My build times took forever. And because it's static site generation, even if I had a typo change just in a blog post, that would take an exceedingly long time to build and redeploy. And then that redeployment would destroy the cache entirely for everybody. And so that led to some suboptimal experiences. Another, and I know that like they're working on fixing that with ISR, and I can't remember what the other acronym is, but they're working on vendor-specific solutions to this problem. But even with those, if the typo that I'm fixing appears on every single page, then I'm right back to where I started, where I have to rebuild the whole site. So it's not a complete solution. So I wasn't happy with that. The other thing that I wasn't happy with is my workshops. I wanted to be able to show, like if I had scheduled the workshop to actually happen and I was selling tickets for it, I wanted to show some details on whether we had an early bird discount and how many tickets were available and stuff right here. And if you look, when we refresh the page, every time we refresh, we get this loading workshop details happening. And so what's happening there is when you're doing static site generation, you have one of two options. You're building your HTML at build time, and so you can make all the API requests at that time on your build server to know what to generate, or you can request from the browser and have the user make that request to what in my case is a serverless function that then talks to the API, because I've got private keys and stuff. And so the option that worked better for me as a developer with the constraints that I had was to make the browser do it, because otherwise every time somebody buys a ticket, I need to rebuild, and again it takes forever. And I in that space of time that it's building, the information that users are looking at is wrong, and I didn't want that. I wanted it to be accurate. And so for this reason, I ended up with the loading spinner situation, which is not a good user experience. And you could say, hey, Kent, why don't you just make a better skeleton UI? But that's like as great as it is, and as awesome as it is to make a really good skeleton UI, I think the best skeleton UI is one that actually shows the actual data. So no skeleton UI. And so that's that was part of the reason why I decided, hey, I don't want to go with static site generation. I'm super done with it because it leads to a poor user experience. So, and there are lots of other problems that we could talk about with static site generation as a practice. I don't think that there's a single use case that where static site generation is should be the preferred solution. And yeah, I also want to demonstrate one other problem that we have when we go with an app that doesn't work until the JavaScript loads, where JavaScript is used to enable the experience rather than to simply enhance it. And so I was working or just looking around one day for YouTube videos, and I ran into this problem. I wasn't searching for problems. I just experienced this as a user. And so in this video, let me turn that off. I slow down the network so that we can talk about it as it happens. But like I said, I actually experienced this. So the first thing that happens when you go to youtube.com is it downloads the HTML document, and then it starts downloading this desktop Polymer JavaScript file along with a bunch of other JavaScript files. this desktop Polymer file is very, very, very large. And while that's downloading, the best that YouTube can do is give you a skeleton UI that isn't even the right theme, honestly. That's going to get updated here in a second. But it doesn't give us anything useful at all while we're waiting for that desktop Polymer to download. And when that desktop Polymer file finally does download, then it gets us enough to start showing some videos and stuff and show the input, but it doesn't download enough to make the input work. And so even like I can type and hit enter, and all that happens is that my entry gets cleared. And what we're waiting for now is this base.js file that is also quite large for the functionality to work. But the thing that's really frustrating about this is that the web has always known how to handle form submissions like this. And so what we're doing here is we're using, we're taking steps back on the web, where the web knows how to deal with this sort of a form submission, but we make it worse by bringing in JavaScript. We make it so that the user has to wait for JavaScript to load before that can even be rendered, because, I mean, frankly, this is using Polymer and web components can't be server rendered. So maybe that's why their skeleton UI is the way it is. But also, even when that's rendered, it's not progressively enhanced. It is JavaScript enabled, and that is not great because it leads to a poor loading experience and a poor user experience, which I literally experienced. So that is something that I would really like to not have in our world, honestly. So I did rewrite my site, and I chose Remix for it because Ryan and Michael I knew they were really smart. They were working on it. They showed me demos, and I was really taken with what Remix was, its foundation on the web platform. And yeah, now my workshops are all listed right here. And I can say, hey, I'm teaching an advanced Remix workshop, and here are the tickets that I'm selling. And so that to me is a better experience than having a loading spinner. So the reason that we go with the loading spinners and the reason we do all the static site generation is we say, well, it's the best way to make a fast site. Well, I'd like you to go to my website and try it out and realize that every single page is different for every single user. No caching, period. Every single time you go to any page, it is hitting the server. It may not be server rendering every single page as you navigate. We're doing client-side rendering, but it is hitting the server to go get data. And it's as fast as it is. Like, look, boom, that was fast, but it hit the server to get this data. It did not like the we do not have the super simple start to React content for that page. Like that blog post is not loaded, but watch this, boom, there it is. So we can have things that are really fast and completely dynamic for the user. You'll notice that these are unique every time. These are relevant to or related to the blog post that you're currently reading, and they don't include any recommendations on blog posts that you've read already. So it's dynamic to every user. We cannot do HTTP caching for this, period. And every time I refresh, I get completely new recommendations every single time because one of them is actually completely random. Another one is just like a popular blog post. And so I think that is really, really cool that I can have my dynamism without my loading spinners, and it can be super fast. So that is what Remix is to me. It enables me to build excellent user experiences and not be ashamed of the code that I had to write to get there. So let's talk a little bit more technically about what Remix is. So that's why I have been so bought into Remix. When I built my site with Remix, I was so taken with it. I was like, man, I don't want to do anything but teach people Remix now. And so that's where my motivation to jump on the board with Remix came from. One other thing that just occurred to me that I want to mention, because you are going to be asking questions. A lot of people ask these two questions, Remix versus Next. We have a very in-depth article about why Remix is better, faster, stronger than Next.js. You can take a look at that. It's a very nuanced answer to that question, but the simple answer is Remix is faster and leads to a better user and developer experience. So if you want to validate my claim then go check out this blog post. I'm not going to go any deeper into that. If you ask that question, we can skip that one because we've got an answer. And then React Server Components and Remix, another common question. Remix is better than anything that React Server Components can do right now. Eventually, maybe React Server Components will be better in the future, and we're providing feedback. We're part of the working group, so we want to make it better. But right now, Remix does not support server components because they're not released and they don't make things better. If they end up making things better, we are not backed into a corner. We can absolutely add support for server components if they do end up making things better. So if you've got those two questions, those are your answers. There you go. Okay. So, and then I guess one other thing I'll mention really quick, we have RemixConf. So if you want to come to Salt Lake City, RemixConf is going to be amazing. It's at the end of May. We'd love to see you there. Okay, great. Let's talk about Remix technically. So this is a Remix route module. We'll look into that in depth when we do the demo. I just want to show you a couple of things that we're not going to demo. So first of all, our goal is to say, hey, if we can get the HTML on the page really fast, then we don't need to have a bunch of loading spinners all over the place, and we can progressively enhance the experience with JavaScript. So by what that means is by the time that the HTML is on the page, the app works, and then the JavaScript just comes along to make the experience better. But the app works before the JavaScript even shows up. And so if YouTube had used Remix to build their site, they wouldn't have that bug with the search input. So, and then also, like, check this out, the bounciness, this is like, this just pollutes the web all over the place where things bounce into place. Watch this, chase.com. This is not even me logged in. This is Chase, like their static page for when you come to their site. Look at all these spinners. And that was cached. That, like, I've been here recently. If I go to uncached, it's even worse. Spin, 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 pop, 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 pop. This is everywhere. We've all experienced this. This is not a good experience. We're just like desensitized to how bad this is. We want it to be fast. We want it to just show up. Boom, there it is. I think that's great. Okay, so that, yeah, we're saying goodbye to Spinageddon. It's toast. I'm super done with it. Here's another cool thing. This is part of what makes my website so fast. Even though every page is going to the server to get data, and every page you navigate to, or like if you just land on the page, it's server rendered. The reason that it's so fast, in part, is my infrastructure. So I deploy to multiple regions all throughout the world using fly.io. There are other services that do this as well. But as you're navigating around, we can do a lot of really cool things for you because Remix is your router, but it's also your bundler, and it's also your data fetching library. Because it's all of those things, it's able to do some really cool things as the user's navigating around. So the user says, hey, I want to go to this link. We can start prefetching all of that stuff. And by the time the user clicks on it, then Remix says, hey, I need this stuff. The browser's like, oh, I already got it. You prefetched it. We're literally just using the platform with link prefetch tags. It's like, it's literally link, rel, prefetch, and then, you know, type in whatever. So we're using the platform. We're just rendering those elements so that those get into the browser cache. And that's so cool. I don't have time to go into depth of why this is so great, but most everybody else is using an in-memory cache that goes away then when the browser is closed or when we navigate somewhere else or anything that you have to warm up again when the user returns. If you're using the browser's cache, you don't have this problem. And we don't just cache like data either. We cache the JavaScript, CSS, anything that you want. It can all be cached in the browser's cache. We're going to talk about data loading when I get into the demo. We'll talk about data updates when I get into the demo. So I want to talk about something we don't get into the demo, and that is nested layout routes. So you might be familiar with nested routing from a file base standpoint. So the file system has nested routing in like Gatsby and Next. They both have a pages directory, and then you have this file structure that maps to URL segments and stuff. But Remix has layout nested routes, which means that the nested routing that you have in the file system maps not only to the URL segment, but a part of the UI. This is very, very significant. Do not underestimate this. Very significant. So what this means is that when I'm working on this particular route, or this route segment, I'm going to be working in a routes/sales/invoices/invoice ID module. That's the file that I'm going to be working in. In a Gatsby and Next.js context, that file is responsible for the entire page when that route is active, the entire page. In a layout nested route scenario like Remix, that's going to be, that file is responsible for just the portion of the page that changes for that part of the URL. That's what nested routing is. And so the impact that this has is if you're responsible for the whole page, you're not only responsible for the UI, which is not a big deal because we can just make layout components, which is why you have a layout component in Gatsby and Next. So not a huge deal. Layout components are not hard, but what is hard is getting the data that needs to go into those layout components. And here's the real rub. So most or a lot of companies have teams of developers working on a single app, and some developers are on this page, other developers are on this other page. And what often happens is it's too complicated to have everybody working in the same code base, or maybe they're working in the same code base, but they're like technically separate apps. So you got full page refreshes across these different pages. Not a great user experience. And so other places are saying, hey, let's just all work in the same code base. It'll all be the same Next app. We'll just be in different areas of the app. That's better because the user isn't transitioning between these different pages, or maybe you're using micro front ends or something. But the real problem comes in when you've got one team that's responsible for the shell of the application, and then they've got various teams that are working within the shell of the application. There are various solutions to doing this, but what normally is going to happen is you have a choice. You can either have each one of those product developers who are working on these different pages sending data to the shell so that the shell can render what it needs to, or you can have the shell go get the data itself. And this is a very significant difference. If you have the shell go get the data itself, then you've got loading spinners all over the place. If you have the team sending the data to the shell, then anytime the shell needs to make a change, they need to communicate to all the teams to say, hey, you need to send us more data. So the option is a really terrible developer experience riddled with bugs by having developers send you the data, or a really bad user experience by having loading spinners everywhere. Which one do you think wins out most often? Yeah, it's going to be the loading spinners everywhere. or you're going to jump full hog into microservices, which brings a whole host of other challenges. In Remix, you don't have this problem. In Remix, you say, hey, I'm the root component, I'm the shell, and I'm responsible for getting the data that that I need to render my portion of the page. So the root, you can see that the sales is responsible for this. So root is literally just responsible for this part. So maybe you've got A/B testing for showing what links that needs to be, or maybe you're loading the user so that you know what to render and whatever. But that's it. You don't have to worry about sending stuff to your children. You don't have to worry about your children sending stuff to you, because as far as your children are concerned, they're the only thing on the page. And so that's what layout nested routing does. When you have nested routing that takes the UI into account, you're able to have tons of teams, countless teams working on the same app and working really cohesively. This, like I said, cannot be overstated how important this is. Another aspect of this that's really cool is it means that Remix is able to do a lot of really awesome optimization. So if I'm working here on the invoices and invoice ID pages, as the user is navigating between these different invoices, we don't have to reload the data for the whole page, and we don't have to optimize for that at all, because Remix is responsible for getting my data, and Remix is also my router. It knows that if I click on this one, it doesn't need to refetch the data for the rest of the page, just this part. And on top of that, because it's also my bundler, it knows that if I go to customers, that I not only do I not need to go fetch the data for this, but that I do need to fetch the data for customers as well as the JavaScript. And I know, and Remix knows where to get that. So there's no wiring up of any of this. Remix is your bundler, it's your router, and it's your data fetching library. And it allows it allows Remix to do all of this stuff for you, and you don't have to think about it. If we had like a little delete icon, we hit delete, Remix will manage making that request to go and delete it from the database, and it will manage updating all of the data on the page for that mutation that you just did. So it'll remove that from the list. It's huge. This, like, say goodbye to Redux and all of that stuff. And we're going to look at that a little bit in the demo. The last really cool thing about nested routing that I want to show you is what happens to errors, because I'm not going to be able to demo that for you either. So because of the way that nested routing works, we can have routes that are responsible for managing their own errors. And we separate the sad path from the happy path. And so you've got a default component that is what you're going to render for this particular part of the UI. And then you have an error boundary component that is what happens when something goes wrong. So something blows up on the server render. That will not work in a Remix app normally, or in a React app. So if error boundaries are a thing in React, but if you have an error on the server, it will just blow up the whole thing. And the best that most people do is they put a header and a footer and maybe a koala with a tear running down its face saying, sorry, something went wrong. We're looking into it or whatever. But in Remix, because of nested routing, we can actually, our error boundaries will handle that. We'll render everything and just render the error boundary in the context of the rest of the app. And so now, if you've got some bad data for a particular invoice, you can say, oh, well, that didn't work. But the user can navigate to other invoices. They can use the entire app, the whole rest of the app, without any problem, because of nested routing and contextual error boundaries. That is huge. That is an enormous benefit, because now your users aren't reporting bugs that say the app doesn't work. They're reporting bugs that say, hey, this particular invoice is busted. That has very big impacts on the business and the user experience in general. Okay, cool. So there's a lot of other things that we could talk about, like styling and how easy Remix makes authentication, a bunch of other stuff like that. But we don't have time for all that. I just want to show you one last demo, or one demo, and then we can get to our Q&A. So this is a simple app. I can make notes here. So 1, 2, and 3. And then I can delete those notes, and it all works. Let me show you how it works. So if I go here to our my app directory, I have a routes directory here, and then my notes. And so that's why I'm at /notes right here. So in this notes, I have a default export that is this notes page function component. And here I'm getting some data. And then I am mapping over that, or I'm checking if we have notes. If we don't, then we say no notes. Otherwise, I'm mapping over those notes to render out this notes display, which just renders the title and a form for the delete button. So that's it. As far as loading data is concerned, I am using this thing called a loader. So the data that goes into my component is like all of the code for getting that data is in the same file. And you're like, big whoop, mine is in the same file too. It's just in this use effect thing. Well, big whoop is right, because this runs on the server and only on the server. So here's what that means. Less JavaScript in the browser. You can use GraphQL without worrying about sending an enormous GraphQL client to the browser. Or you don't have to use GraphQL. You could use whatever you want. Fetch works on the server. Remix polyfills fetch for you. So yeah, you do all of this stuff on the server. You can interact with third-party APIs without worrying about API keys. So no need to make a serverless function for proxying to third-party APIs or anything like that. You can connect to a database directly. So that's what we're doing right here, is I'm talking to an actual database to make and update these notes and everything. So because it runs on the server, you can do all sorts of things. You can do like real great user authentication stuff where you're using actual cookies that are HTTPS only. And so people can't hijack with third-party scripts or anything like that, hijack your user's token or whatever. So lots of really awesome things coming from a security perspective, as well as the reduced amount of code, and just everything is better because this runs on the server. And Remix is responsible for that network chasm that stands between the client and the server. So you don't have to think about it. The other thing I want you to notice is there's no code in here that says, oh, well, when I delete a note or when I add a note, let's go and update my state to update my notes or whatever. You don't worry about that. Remix is managing that network. And so it knows when you make a mutation that it needs to go and refetch to go get all of the data. And so it's managing keeping that data up to date for you. This is so nice. You might appreciate it just hearing about it, but you'll appreciate it even more when you're using it. It's so great. Okay, so let's talk about mutations though. So we've got a form here for the logout. So this is interesting. Most people who are doing React apps for your logout button, you're just going to have a button that has an on-click on it, and that on-click is going to, reset your state or whatever it's going to do to log the user out and navigate them somewhere else. What Remix says is, hey, let's do progressive enhancement. Let's just use what the browser does for managing the mutations, which is forms. And so this form renders a regular form. And so the action and the method are part of like the regular web platform spec. And so when you click on this button, it's going to send a post request to the logout route. And we have that defined right here. So this has what's called an action function. And so when we make a post request, it's going to call this function, and we can do this logout. And this logout is our own code. We just get the session out of the request, which literally is just saying, using our session storage abstraction to turn this cookie into a session storage object so we can set values into that cookie. And so then with that session, we say, hey, let's destroy the session and tell the browser to set that cookie so that the session is now gone. And then we redirect to the login. So that's all our code. That's our authentication code. That's cool. Then we've got another form for creating the note. So we've got an input for the title and then a save button. And then we've got another form down here for each one of the notes. Now, what's interesting is because these forms only have a method, they don't have an action, they are not going to post anywhere other than the page that we're on currently. So this route is responsible for handling these actions, and that is what this is for. But we've got multiple forms that can submit to this, so we've got to disambiguate. The way we do that is by having the form submit what action it's trying to take, whether it's delete note or create note. And how we disambiguate is by having the button have a name and a value, which I didn't know this before Remix, but yes, your submit button can have a name and a value, and whichever submit button is clicked is what the value is going to be for that particular form name value. So you could even have two submit buttons in the same thing, and whichever one the user clicks on is the one that's going to be set for that name and value. Another cool thing, check this out. You can even put this this button outside of the form, and then you could say form, my form, and give this an ID. So you can put this anywhere on the page if you want to, which is kind of a wild thing. You can do that for inputs as well. You could just say form, my form, and now all of a sudden this input is associated to that form. All declarative and all web platform specification. That's just the way it works. So that's pretty cool. And because of that, it actually works before JavaScript finishes loading. So I'm going to show you that. We're going to talk a little bit about progressive enhancement here. And then what I want to show you is progressive enhancement and how easy it is to make adjustments and improvements to your app and without changing your mental model. So what we do most often as software developers is maintain existing stuff. We don't like generate new projects on a regular basis, though we do have a really awesome way to generate new projects that is going to be released hopefully today. Yeah, most often you're maintaining an existing app. And so I want to show you how great that is with Remix. So first thing I'm going to do is just so we can observe the progressive enhancement piece, I'm turning off JavaScript. So this is like JavaScript failed to load for some reason, or it's taking a long time to load for some reason, or whatever it is. I just want to demonstrate what progressive enhancement means when we're talking about Remix. So there is no JavaScript on this page, and I can create one note and two and three and so on. And I can delete all those, boom, boom, boom. They all work. So that all works. So that's cool. Like the app works without JavaScript. Whoopee. It's actually not a really huge target of what Remix is trying to accomplish because we really like JavaScript, but it naturally fell out of the mental model that we were trying to create, which is let's emulate what the browser does and just understand what the browser does by default. So I'm going to slow down our network, and I want to show you something that's kind of interesting about this. So I'm going to create a new note, and I'm going to hit save, and I want you to look for if you're a regular user using this site, how do you know that the app has responded to you? So when I hit save, we don't see any updates right here, but we do see the fave icon is spinning. And if you're on a mobile device, it'll have like a little thing that slides across the top or whatever. So the browser has affordances for showing the user that stuff is happening. That's like a default behavior. Same thing happens with our delete. We get that loading spinner. So there is something that the user can get. And so this is actually pretty cool. So you as a developer could say, you know what, I don't have time to implement loading states or anything like that. So we're going to say reload document on all of these forms. And even with JavaScript enabled, even if that is the case, and so we have JavaScript on the page. You as the busy developer is just like, I just don't have time for this. You can say new note, you hit save, and you get this loading state or this pending state just like built into the browser. The data gets updated for you automatically and everything as well. So that's nice. That's a good place to start. But we probably want to have a better loading state. And so that's what we're going to do is we're going to improve the loading state here. And so because Remix is managing your route transitions and your data fetching, Remix is managing the state for you. And so if you console log use rendering, then you come over here. Let's not throttle. So we get an initial render, and then when I make another note and hit save, we're gonna. Oh, right, this is reloading. Here, let's turn off reload document. We're doing the JavaScript transition now. So new thing, and we get a bunch of renders. And sometimes people look at that and they're like, what the heck? Why is it rendering so much? Well, there's a reason. And the reason is that Remix is managing all of the transitional states for you so that you can just use those to know what information to give to the user. So if we say use transition, this is the hook that gives us the state updates for whenever the user is making some sort of transition. They click on a link or they submit a form or whatever. And so now we can see that the state is idle. And I say another thing here. And we see we get a couple of re-renders for the fact that we're submitting, we're loading, and then we're idle again. And so there are various other things that are triggering re-renders. So don't freak out about re-renders as much. People need to stop worrying about re-renders and start worrying about like their infrastructure because that is your bottleneck. So anyway, we're going to use this though to identify whether the transition that's happening is because the user hit the save button. So we're going to say is saving equals transition dot submission dot form data dot get action create note. So let's talk about what's going on here. So the transition is just an object that holds all of this state. The submission is if the transition that's happening is because somebody submitted a form, then this submission object will have a form data property on it as well as a couple others. And that form data is actually a browser API. Like you can literally go in here and say new form data. That's a browser API. We're just exposing the browser API to you. So we're giving you the form data that comes from the form that was submitted. And so we can get out of that the action. Again, this is browser API. So if you don't like saying get with a string and stuff, and you'd rather do .action, you can blame the web platform. Don't blame us. That's just the way the web platform works. I actually think it's fine. And so if we've got a submission and its form data has an action that is create note, then we know that we're saving. And so now I can say, hey, let's disable this. And we'll say, if we're saving, then saving. Otherwise, we'll say save. And so with that, now I can throttle. We'll say new thing. And we get a saving, ... and we get this disabled state. And so we see like have some visual that something is happening. Now, what's really cool about this is you can put this use transition anywhere. And so on my site, I still need to look into this. I'm not sure why, but I have one page that's a little bit slower than the rest. and that's my Chats with Kent podcast. And so if you go there really quickly, then you'll see my global transition state as well. So if we go chats, then we'll see this loading state right there. And so, yeah, because these transitions are global, and Remix is managing that for you, you can put this anywhere that you like, whether it's really close to the thing that the user did, or if it's just like a global thing like mine, and have a really nice pending state. So we still don't have a pending state for this, so let's go ahead and add that pending state for that. We'll bring the same thing down here. We'll say is deleting. And so if it's now delete note, and we've got a bunch of these as well. So we need to know, is it delete note, and is the note ID that is being deleted the note ID that I'm rendering? And if that's the case, then I know that I'm rendering the one that's getting deleted. So we'll say disabled is deleting, and is deleting or delete. And that is it. We've now added transitions that look really great. And so if I come here and say delete, boom, we get a deleting ... If I say this is great and hit save, we get a saving ... and a disabled button. So we don't have to manage that. And again, like Remix is updating this state for us, so we don't have to worry about all of the saying, oh, they just made a mutation, let's go update our client-side state. You don't worry about that. When I'm using Remix, I feel like my Redux store is the database, really. And so there is no store of any kind, and it's so nice to not have to worry about that. So yeah, and just like, oh man, it's so easy. The mental model is all the same. We've just progressively enhanced the user's experience by making this, making these pending states closer and more contextual to what the user is doing. Okay, just a couple of last things I want to show. So we've got a problem here that is not completely obvious. So watch this. There are a couple of things that are going to happen here in a second that I want to talk about. First off, we're going to delete all of these, and then I want you to see what happens in the UI, and then we'll talk about what happens in the network. So I'm going to say delete, 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 delete. And now that is a funny UI. It should say deleting on all of them as those things are being deleted. But what's really cool is that even though that was a suboptimal user experience, there are not bugs. It did the right thing. I clicked all those delete buttons, and the right thing happened. They all got deleted. That's great. That I would love to trade bugs for just a suboptimal experience that I can improve and optimize. What is more often is we have a pretty good experience that has bugs, or maybe like a reasonable, or maybe it's a bad experience that also has bugs. But in any case, I'm really glad to not have bugs in this experience. So the right thing happened. Another thing that's interesting is when you clicked on, or when we clicked on all those links or those buttons, we ended up canceling requests. So we canceled the post request that we made to go and make that deletion. Now, what's kind of interesting about that is you might think, well, I don't want to cancel the delete, but with the way that the web works, you don't actually cancel any request that's been made. What you're actually canceling is the response, because it's impossible to say, hey, server, you know that thing that I just requested? Could you like cancel that? Never mind. That's like app code that you have to build. There's no web platform API for that. And so what you're actually doing is canceling the response. And that is correct, because that's actually what the web does. If you go to, let's see, maybe Twitter, and if we turn off, yeah, we'll do slow 3G. Let's turn off JavaScript. Actually, let's see what happens to Twitter if we turn off JavaScript. I guess it doesn't. Yeah, there we go. Hold on a second. That can't be. I turned off JavaScript. It is loading JavaScript. JavaScript. Oh, that's coming from a service worker. Oh, nice job, Twitter. Okay, I need to come up with a different example. Let's go. Actually, let's use my site. Okay, so we're gonna go disable JavaScript. Disabled. Let's no throttling. Get that refreshed, and then slow 3G. Okay, so I'm going to clear all this stuff out. And let's see. Yeah, we'll click on this link and then I click on this link and then maybe click on this link. So you'll notice that as I'm clicking on these different links, oh man, that got cleared. Well, you may have noticed, hopefully you know. Here, actually, let's do this once more. I'm going to preserve the log. Now I'm on the blog. I've got tons of links to it. So click, click, click. You'll notice that as I'm clicking these links, these are all getting canceled in the DevTools. And that's correct. That's like what you want, right? I was going to go here and now I'm not going to go there anymore. I'm going to go somewhere else. So this is desired behavior. And man, that's fast. Oh, that's so cool. Even on a slow 3G, did you see that? Like how fast that was? So I'm going to go here again and it's downloading the image and boom, like that all works without JavaScript. And then I go back to the overview. Man, like freak. Oh, that's awesome. I mean, caching, that's all it is, but like, yeah, it's so cool. Anyway, so that's the way that the browser works is when the user changes their mind on where they want to go, we're going to cancel where they went before and just continue where they're going next. And that's the same way with forms. A form submission is a transition. So we're going somewhere else. What's interesting though, is that this particular form submission redirects us back to the same URL. And so if we look at our action here, you notice that we're saying redirect to notes in both the delete and create case. Now that's pretty unusual actually. What normally happens is you're creating a project or an Airbnb thing. You're going to host an Airbnb. So you are on the create page and then you say save and it's going to take you to the preview page or it's going to take you to the published page or something. So creating something and then or making a mutation and navigating to somewhere else, that's a really common thing in the web. But for lots of UIs, that's not actually all that common or that's not used. For lots of UIs, you've just got like just one page and you're making a bunch of mutations on that page. And so for that, Remix has a different hook that we're going to use, but the exact same mental model. If you wanted to do yeah, for most mutation based things that you do on the web, you have to change your mental model based on which one of those things you're doing. But in Remix, you do not. So we're just going to do this for the delete because I'm almost done and we're just going to wrap this up. But you probably want to do this for the create as well. The first thing that we're going to do is we're just saying, hey, we're not going to redirect anymore. We're just going to let them stay on this same page. Even though we happen to be redirecting to this page as it is, when you do that redirect, it actually adds up another item to the stack, which ends up to the browser history stack, which is not really what we want to do. So instead of redirecting to /notes, we're going to just return a new response. It says, whoops, worked. And that'll have a status at 200 and it works. That's great. By the way, I kind of failed to mention, but this request object is a web fetch request object. Even though this is running on a node server, or maybe you're deployed to a V8 isolate on Cloudflare Workers or Dino or whatever, it's always going to be a web fetch request, which is really, really nice to work with that everywhere you go. Yeah, whether like whatever platform you're on, we're always going to normalize it to web fetch stuff. And so you actually end up spending a lot more time on MDN than you do on the Remix docs. So anyway, we're going to return this new response that it worked. And then down here, on the delete, instead of use transition is for the global transitions, but we're not doing a global transition anymore. We're just making a fetch. So we're going to say use fetcher, and we're going to rename this from transition to fetcher. Everything else stays the same. It has the exact same API, but the other thing is this form is for global transitions, and it's the transition manager is that use transition. In our case, we just want this fetcher to manage this particular fetch request. So we're going to say fetcher.form. And that's it. Everything else is the same. So we come over here and we say, hey, let's not throttle really quick. So we can make 1, 2, and 3. And then throttle to slow 3G. And I'll say delete, delete, delete. And it's all working exactly as I want it to. Remix is managing those multiple submissions, canceling requests as needed, and updating my notes. And I just I'm blown away by how great that is. It's so nice. So I guess the last thing that I want to show is as awesome as our loading state is for deleting these, what if we didn't need to have a loading state at all? Like, what if we could just say, hey, you know what? If we're deleting, and let's return. We don't need to render anything because like there's in the future, this won't even be here. So if we're deleting, let's just be optimistic. Like when you favorite a tweet, it doesn't like wait to turn the heart red. It just turns it red. And then if there's an error or something, then it'll show you a message that says, hey, there was an error with this. And so we're going to add, this is called optimistic UI. It's very common, but Remix made it easier than anything else. And I'm actually going to say if math.random is less than 0.5, then we're going to return a new response, oh no, with status of 500. So who knows what happened? Something weird happened. I don't know. And normally you'd want to have maybe return JSON and then use this hook called use action data, so you could actually display what happened. But yeah, for us, we'll just do this to make it nice and easy. And I'll add another couple, so just so we can get a couple of these. So most of the time, the big trick with optimistic UI is what do you do when your optimism was misplaced because something went wrong? So we're going to say, hey, let's remove this right away. But then what do you do when that thing actually wasn't deleted for some reason? Like the tweet has been deleted, and so now you can't favorite it or whatever. So now we're throttling a slow 3G, and I'm going to delete. So they're all gone. Sweet. I love it. That's awesome. And oh, wait, one of them failed to actually do. Oh, two of them did. Yeah, it looks like two of these failed to delete. Bummer. That's fine. That's okay. And you could show like a little banner that says this failed to delete for some reason. But like, look at the code that I did for that to happen. I just said, hey, fetcher, are they deleting? If they are, then don't render anything. And that's it. And then Remix is managing everything else. Wow. So I can't wait to see the cool experiences that you can build with Remix. It is so awesome. And it'll save you a silly amount of time and enable you to build excellent user experiences. So that is all the time that I've got for this demo. As I wrap up and we get into answering questions, I just want to mention, if you go to remix.run and scroll down to the bottom, you'll find links to our socials. So we've got GitHub, Twitter, YouTube, and Discord. Discord community is awesome. So I strongly advise you join that. And we've got a really awesome YouTube channel as well. Really great content there and more coming. And then we tweet sometimes and stuff. So yeah, I would love to have you come hang out with us there. And then our quick start guide is really great to help you get started. The Jokes app deep dive is really, really in depth. We talk about authentication, how to manage like even optimistic UI in here, database setup, all of that stuff. So you can check that out as well. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions. And I don't know if somebody's going to come up and help me answer those, or if I'm just going to go through that myself. Hi, Justin. You're muted. Hey, Justin, you're muted.
Of course I am. Sorry about that. Thanks so much, Kent. That was really fantastic. I'll pop the questions on the screen and I'll read them out so everyone can go through them. The first one is from Marcus, and it's quite long. So I'm gonna pop the comments up and we can just read through them and then you can answer at the end. Okay. So his question relates to CSS frameworks in Remix, and he says it currently feels a little clunky to implement component-driven CSS.
Yeah, it is. So
there's quite a bit more, Kent. I'll just go through it and then if you don't mind, thanks. Remix preference to do as much as possible on the server, but coming from a just-in-time mindset with CSS fetched as components are rendered on the page. He just says that feels almost at odds with the way Remix wants to work, and that trying to implement Tailwind or CSS modules feels a little forced. And can you tell us a little bit about the Remix roadmap when it comes to component level CSS? And what is the Remix way, or what would you say is the best CSS stack in Remix? Sure, that's quite a lot.
Yeah. So I definitely have thoughts on this. For background, Remix is built with the web in mind. And so the way that the web gets CSS on the page is through link tags. And so if your CSS framework doesn't use link tags to get CSS on the page, then you have to do a little bit of extra work. Now, I'm a little bit surprised to hear trying to implement Tailwind feels a little forced. Tailwind is actually pretty straightforward. You run Tailwind, generate a CSS file, and then you import that CSS file. And that's, to me, that feels pretty straightforward. And that is my preferred CSS stack. Whether or not you're using Remix, I think it's amazing. I love Tailwind. And yeah, using it in everything. But you don't have to use Tailwind. You can use like CSS preprocessors. But component-driven CSS, where you're not using Tailwind, you want to use the CSS and JS library or CSS modules. Yeah, right now CSS modules is just not supported. That requires bundler support. But we are working on it. We've been working on it for a while, so it will come soon. We are actively working on it, and yeah, excited for that to be shipped in the next couple weeks. So that will help a great deal with the component-driven CSS. And CSS and JS actually does work. There are examples of styled components and emotion and stitches. So that absolutely works. It's just the thing is that these just-in-time compile or CSS frameworks are not great for user experience. They leave a lot to be desired. And I know I created one. I created Glamorous, which is a precursor to Emotion. And so, yeah, I've been through it all, my friends, and I'm telling you, just skip to the end and use Tailwind. But yeah, we are going to support component layer of CSS, and in the future, we may even possibly build in support for Tailwind because we just feel like it's so awesome. So yeah. Good luck with that.
Thank you very much. A question from Zandor. He says he knows that React Router is the core of Remix, alongside a strong helping of using the platform. And his question is, when it was first announced, it struck me that it should be possible to create something like Remix that is UI lib agnostic. Do you feel that's true? And if so, why is React Router so central to Remix?
Yeah. So what's interesting about React Router is that a lot of it has nothing to do with React. And so we are actively right now working on a Remix router that will be framework agnostic. And when we're done with that, then you'll have a React router that's basically an adapter of what that Remix router is. And that my guess, it'll be a couple hundred lines of code. It won't be a huge thing. So on top of that, I should say, before we even do that, we are working on taking a lot of what's in Remix and putting it into React Router. And then we're going to make React Router framework agnostic. That's kind of how that's going to work. But yes, this is something that we are actively working on.
Great, thanks. There's a question from Jacques. He says, full disclosure, we're building a Remix monitoring tool and want to know if you have any existing ones that you like the most for monitoring apps in production.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there is one that monitors web vitals, not like in real time or anything right now, but it's called Metronome. And yeah, that doesn't sound like exactly what you're trying to do, aside from the performance that you mentioned. But yeah, I don't know of any other tools. I think it's awesome that you're working on one that's a Remix specific tool, and I'd love to see it. So feel free to ping me. And yeah, I think that's awesome.
A couple more. Are you planning on adding fast refresh anytime soon?
So that is not a priority right now. The thing with fast refresh is that it requires you to develop with code that's wildly different from the code that ends up in production, which I don't really like doing. Right, yeah. I never liked fast refresh ever. The only situation it made sense to me was in like a component library situation. But I never trust fast refresh. I ran into a lot of situations where my app got into a state that was impossible because of fast refresh. So I know that a lot of people feel like they can't develop a website without it. I challenge your assumption. Remix the way that Remix works is we have a live reload component that you can use that will reload the browser when you make a change. This has the nice effect of reloading server code as well. And so if you change a server loader, it will reload that. And so like maybe one day, I don't know, but personally, I really don't like fast refresh. And so I'm not sad that Remix doesn't have it.
Okay. Thanks. From Martin, any Remix courses in the pipeline?
Yeah, so part of what my responsibility is as the director of developer experience is creating content to help people learn. And because it's my job and I am salaried and have stock in the company and everything, like it's not going to be paid. We are not planning on using education as a mechanism for making money for the company. And so that may change, like the plans are not promises, but that is the current plan. And so you can expect an Epic React Dev like course for Remix that is completely free. That
Wow,
is
that's
something.
fantastic to hear.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
yeah. So that is something that I am working on amongst all the other things that I'm working on. So I wouldn't expect something that sizable anytime soon. May not even be
Right.
this year.
Mhm.
But I mean, maybe it's possible. But it is, yeah, I'm constantly working on improving the content story behind Remix.
Great. That's really wonderful to hear. Last question, also from Zandor, and he disclaims that it's not entirely Remix related. But what are your thoughts on Tanner Lindsay's recent React location?
Yeah, I've actually had lunch with Tanner. We live relatively close to each other, and we talked about like what were his pain points with React Router that led him to build React Location. There are some very specific issues that he ran into for his specific use case that I can see why having your own router would make sense for those use cases. I'm pretty sure that we can build those use cases into the router, but they are pretty fringe, and so we're not planning on we haven't prioritized those use cases at all. I'm pretty confident that you could make React Router or make a React Location work in a Remix app. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive. Um, yeah, like React Location to me is like, let's bring superpowers to the query params. And most apps don't need that. But for apps that do, React Location seems like a fine solution. And I'd love to see somebody put together an example where you can get the query param superpowers in a Remix app with React Location. I think that should be possible. And that should tide you over until React Router supports some of the things that React Location does.
Great. Thank you. Right. It doesn't look like there are any more questions, and we are nicely on time, I think. So just finally, just thank you so much, Kent, for giving of your time to come and speak to us this evening. It was really fascinating, and Remix looks like, wow, it's extremely impressive, I have to say.
Well, thank you.
So that's definitely something I think a lot of us are going to be looking into. Skulk, before we go, Skulk just wants to make a quick announcement. And then we'll end the stream. Kent, if you wouldn't mind just staying for a minute.
Sure.
I'm just going to take us away and put Skulk on.
So, Kent, you are actually welcome to leave. You don't need to stick around for the announcement. But that being said, sorry as well, guys, my mic is having some issues, so it might be a bit soft, which is why I'm putting it right here in my face. So for those of you that are not familiar with Zap, which is South African product design, it's kind of similar to ZATech and so forth, and kind of we work very closely with the folks at Zap. Justin and I are also kind of part of the core team there. and we have recently started every last Monday of every month. We're doing kind of a community huddle, which is essentially just kind of a space where we meet up and we kind of get feedback on design work that we've done, answer any questions as a community, and maybe just network and kind of, even if there's room, kind of work on projects together and so forth. So it's just a space for specifically for Cape Town. It's an in-person meetup for designers in Cape Town, working within the realm of like product design. So that would be UX, UI, service design. Even, you know, if you're a developer and you're doing like pattern libraries and design systems and those type of things, it might be something that you might be interested in. So that is just, you can check it out on, it's just ZAPD. So you can go to zapd.co.za or just search for ZAPD, pronounced ZAP, on Meetup. And so that is kind of all that I have to say. Justin, are you still around?
Yeah. Just thanks for everyone who tuned into the stream. Much appreciated. YouTube takes about 24 hours to do the rendering, and then it's available for playback with the live chat, etc. So we will also share it on our platforms tomorrow once that has happened. Yeah. So thanks again, and hopefully you'll join us for web components next week. Thanks all.
Cool. All right. Cheers, everyone.